the screaming. Alright. We are maybe live? I don't know. We'll check. We can check on the phone. Live on the internet. See if anybody's even there. Oh yeah, it's going. Yeah. Me. One watching. It's okay. It'll record it, which is nice. So that's kind of the benefit of this. Just get started at 7. Hello. Just so you guys are aware, we are streaming on the internet right now. So if you talk loud enough, the internet can hear you. You've got a few things to say to the internet. They can't see you, so they can hear you. It'll save it there too, so we can share it later. I don't know if I can edit it.
Good, I'm glad it's documented. Is this a new thing now? Live
Try it.
Horizon?
Well, like it came down to recording it, and like I was worried. Like I don't know if it'll fill up the hard drive and then like stop. So like this doesn't use any hard drive space. It's just streaming it straight, and YouTube's saving it as it gets it.
You're just doing the audio?
The audio and the video from this thing.
Oh, I see. Cool.
Yeah, if anybody's interested, I can show them how to do it. It's kind of cool.
Well, it's better than the way I usually do it with my phone.
Yeah. Well, then I got like this nice microphone here.
Yeah, cool.
Hopefully it works. I mean, like we'll only really know once. I mean, I guess you could bring up your phone right now and like tell me if you can hear me. But
You get the feedback.
Got a little weird.
Little sound loop.
We'll just leave now. And by one of the outside.
You totally can.
These letters of document.
Oh, that's what I sound like when I laugh.
I don't have much speed. I don't have that word. Get one of the other brother.
It's actually not.
That's my most viewed YouTube video. It's not about occultism or anything. It's how to clean a background off of a scan page.
Maybe I'll check it out.
But you have to have Photoshop though. Oh, nice. Inside.
Pretty good, right? Say it like that.
So you. I like your snack.
Snick? I drew that. I drew that snick. I drew it. Watch out!
It's all Jim's ritual. I'm gonna write a review of Jim's ritual for the next
That'll be
article.
the next episode.
a line by line commentary.
That could get interesting.
Well, that's what Crowley used to use the equinox for, was like reviewing other people's work. It seems like
Really?
anybody who's anybody had their own review, and you know the equinox was in part him publishing his personal poetry and material, but it was also like, you know, a big review section where he could just rip on people and like make fun of people he didn't like. Well, like there was one whole there was one reoccurring section that was called My Crapulous Contemporaries, where he would just make fun, like it was like it'd be a 5-page article about why his weight, you know.
You could probably throughout the whole equinox you could probably compile a whole volume of stuff about weight.
Yeah.
Yes. Just like
He gave apparently good reviews to Waite's poetry, though.
Yeah.
It didn't seem like he was being sarcastic. It seemed like he had actually had a good.
Well, and then like it's interesting to see it in context because like the last equinox, John Yarker had died, and so the first part of it was like a memorial to John Yarker, and hello, come on in. And then the Crapulous Contemporary for that edition was called Dead Weight, where he announced that this guy had died, that Wade had died. And he even put like a black border around it. You're welcome to sit there. There's another seat here. I can pull out some more seats too. And you don't have to sit.
Oh, that's a special guest.
One more person. Let's see.
So,
Saw a red picture.
that's me.
Is that your thing?
That was my ritual dog. Where'd it go?
I don't have the picture either. Someone needs to send it.
I'll send you pictures. I take pictures every time.
Get all of them in there. Get it on one page.
That's true.
Good.
We could actually just do
But then that's the thing, though. If it's like pictures with people that are in people's permissions.
Oh, no, this is just. So we did. Took pictures of our altar. I don't think we took pictures of anybody. I thought about it, but it just didn't get past my brain.
It was just an altar.
Yeah.
That's all it was. Nothing else.
In some respects, that is really true.
Just a couple more minutes here and we'll get started. Not gonna start until I get at least 10 YouTube viewers.
Oh, okay. Now we know what it's about.
Gotta get those likes. None. It's nice. It'll record it though and save it to YouTube. So. No, I didn't decide I was gonna do it till like an hour ago. So. And people, Kellen said he's sick, so he can't make it. So I was like, well,
Why didn't tell him?
Yeah, right?
he might be.
So you don't have any viewers.
Oh, that might have been him. It said one viewer watching. I assumed it was me, but when I looked at them. Kellen, are you there?
For streaming things this way.
Disturbing. Just keep addressing Kellen.
Oh, there's 2 watching now.
Oh.
It must
Oh, there you
could be
go.
Kellen.
There you go.
The other one is John, and he's sitting next to Kellen. What's that? Well, they were both on their phones.
Oh.
Even though they're sitting
Okay, why don't we get started? Thanks for showing up, everybody.
Yep.
Yeah, so this class, the use of color as a language in the Thoth Tarot. I've been wanting to give this class for quite a while. I've been studying colors, and Kellen finally poked me. He's like, "Come on, let's do it. It's time to do class." So, so yeah, we're going to work out the kinks tonight. So yeah, I'd like to start off with a quote from, well, it's kind of more of a passage from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Saint von Goethe, I should say, who wrote, as I found out last week, who wrote an entire book on the theory of color, or sometimes it's translated as the doctrine of color, which is kind of a more sinister title, but it's more it's sort of a scientific exploration of color in 1810, as much as they could do that, of various pigments, different ways of judging color, but also like the effects of color on individuals and its use in certain symbolism. It's obviously fairly rudimentary compared to like some extensive, color theory things you can find today. But anyway, so in this section titled "Allegorical, Symbolical, Mystical Application of Color," it has been circumstantially shown above the rest of the book that every color produces a distinct impression on the mind, and thus addresses at once the eye and feelings. Hence, it follows that every color may be employed for certain moral and aesthetic ends. Such an application, coinciding entirely with nature, might be called symbolical, since the color world would be employed in conformity with its effect, and would at once express its meaning. If, for example, pure red were assumed to designate majesty, there can be no doubt that this would be admitted to be a just and expressive symbol. All this has already been sufficiently entered into. Another application is nearly allied to this. It might be called allegorical application. In this, there is more of accident and caprice, insomuch as the meaning of a sign must first be communicated to us before we know what it is to signify. What idea, for instance, is attached to the green color, which has been appropriated to hope? That, lastly, color may have a mystical allusion, may be readily surmised, for since every diagram in which the variety of colors may be represented points to those primordial relations which belong to both nature and the organ of vision, there can be no doubt that these may be made use of as a language, in cases where it is proposed to express similar primordial relations which do not present themselves to the senses in so powerful and varied a manner. The mathematician extols the value and applicability of the triangle. The triangle is revered by the mystic. Much admits of being expressed in it by diagrams and, among other things, the law of the phenomenon of color. In this case, indeed, we presently arrive at the ancient, mysterious hexagon. When the distinction of yellow and blue is duly comprehended, and especially the augmentation into red, by means of which the opposite qualities tend towards each other and become united in a third, then certainly an especially mysterious interpretation will suggest itself, since a spiritual meaning may be connected with these facts. And when we find the two separate principles producing green on the one hand and orange or scarlet on the other, we can hardly refrain from thinking in the first case on the earthly, and in the last on the heavenly generation of the Elohim. So, anyways, I thought that was an interesting take from a Gnostic saint. So yeah, the use of color as a language in the Thoth Tarot. With that intro, so the Thoth Tarot uses color very dramatically. Like compared to some of the older tarot, which could only really use the pigments that were readily available at the time. The Thoth Tarot is just an explosion of color, thanks to Frida Harris, who painted all these in watercolor. When I first encountered the Thoth Tarot, I was just kind of mystified by it all, and I thought she was just kind of, doodling whatever she wanted to do, and like, oh, I'm going to make this one a little darker, make this one a little brighter, whatever. But, I had that appreciation of it for about 15 years before I finally realized there's kind of a pattern to it. And I'm going to share that with you guys tonight. And we'll go, first I'm going to start off with a history of the use of color in occultism, and then we'll move on to exploring individual cards, and we'll just kind of go that way until we're out of slides or out of time. Just housekeeping, there's bathrooms back there, there's a donation box out there, and as I stated before, this is getting recorded live on YouTube, so yeah, there's no video, but the internet can hear your voice if you talk, so just keep it in mind. And of course the video will be made available afterwards. So, let's dive in. First, just to reiterate what Gerte covered, there is a wide range of non-occult meaning in color, which we're not going to get into tonight because we simply don't have time. And I'm no colorologist. I'm no expert on colors. So, but we'll just cover it briefly just because it kind of informs some of the things, just to get our minds flowing. So first off, natural color, just as he stated in the first symbolical use of color, whereas like red might suggest blood, blue might suggest the sky, green is plants, and it's like direct color signification, and poetical use that is very obvious and doesn't need anybody to explain it. Then we move on to sort of the illusionary, the tribalism, or did he call this allegorical? The tribe, sort of anything that has to do with flags and clothing, various things that are like, this is my color, that you wouldn't know if you saw a red, white, and blue necessarily. Well, that's not a great example, but you wouldn't necessarily know certain patterns of color necessarily mean certain tribes or states. A great example of this would be like Scottish tartan colors, where the individual patterns of the lines and colors indicated a particular tribe. Going into history, we see certain uses of this to designate also like stations of like government. So like in the Catholic Church, the cardinals are all wearing their is it the crimson, I think, or yeah, Roman red. Looking back a little bit further, the Romans had their Tyrian purple, which was a very hard color to make, and they restricted it through laws to be only certain people could wear that particular color, and it conveyed social status along with everything else. And then we have color as a code, which is separate than tribalism. This is where color has been decided to mean a certain thing that we can convey to other people. So like signal flag, maritime signal flags are one example where they're like, various flags will mean different things depending on the colors and patterns that are displayed on them. You also get flowers, like the Victorian flower code, where certain colors of flowers would mean various esoteric things, and you had to be sort of initiated into the meaning to get it. They were, it wasn't entirely obvious when you received a yellow rose what that would mean versus some other flower. And then modernly we have like the hanky code, for those, etc. So yeah, those are non-occult or non-esoteric, non-spiritual meanings of color. From there, we go into the history of the occult meaning of color, as far as I understand it. I'm sure there's plenty of there's going to be plenty of things that we're missing in here. And if you have any major examples, please let me know. I've got a website, keepsilence.org, and there is Liber Iris on there, where I'm trying to collect as many parts of this particular path, of this particular historical path of how the meanings of color sort of assembled and walked themselves to how we use them today. So let me know. I'd love to update that if anybody has any good examples. So first, we're going to look at a very, very simple color pattern that is present in a lot of older occult works, which is just red, green, white, and black. We first find this in the Zohar, where they describe these four fires, these four flames that are at the beginning of the universe that are in four different colors. A black flame, and a red flame, and a green flame, and a white flame. They even go on to say that the primordial Torah was written with the white flame upon the black flame. So like this is sort of the creation of the universe was created out of these flames. They don't really say exactly what they mean, but a little later on, they sort of describe them as the archangels that surround the throne of God. And so the four angels are those four colors, and therefore they sort of create a rainbow. You get this a lot in some of the older traditions where colors were harder to make when they were writing this stuff and coming up with the dogma, where like it was really hard to make. You couldn't make purple, like, so purple just was straight out. You're like that's no. But some of the colors were a little bit easier to make or represent. You see this also like in Tibetan Buddhism, where the rainbow consists of just 5 colors and like one of them's black. It's like but when you see it, you're like, that's the rainbow. Like that's, of course, that's the rainbow. You see them on like the flags, and it seems like to Western eyes we're like, why are they choosing those colors? But it's supposed to look like a rainbow. So anyways, the Zohar had these 4 colors. These 4 colors also appear in Revelation as the riders of the apocalypse colors. They appear a lot in alchemy, where there's like the red lion or the green dragon, the black raven, the white swan, with a few other supplementary colors like gold and silver. But for some reason, these are the traditional colors. They also appear in the work of John Dee quite a bit, John Dee and Edward Kelly, when they have the vision of the roundhouse, where all the angels come out and sort of present to them the 4 tablets of the world, or it's connected to the tablet of earth, so the 4 quarters of the world. They see these cloths rolled out that are these particular colors. A red carpet rolls out and a green carpet. So yeah, that's, as for their meaning, there's not a lot of, alchemy has a lot of sources that you can see why the particular alchemists use the particular colors, and those are generally related directly to the materials that they're working with. So like red might indicate, a reddish material kind of emerged, and they wrote that down as a red lion that, In the Zohar and D, it's not entirely clear why they chose those colors. But it is a pattern. Moving on, we passed through the renaissance of occultism to Masonry and the SRIA. They have their history in some older Western magic traditions. So in particular, they draw heavily from Agrippa. So Agrippa has of occult philosophy in 1533. He has a sort of a description of what colors are supposed to be used for what particular magical workings you're going to do. So he says, for all colors, black, lucid, earthly, leaden, brown have relation to Saturn. Sapphire and airy colors, of those which are always green, clear, purple, darkish golden, mixed with silver, belong to Jupiter. For Mars, red colors, and burning, fiery, flaming, violet, purple, bloody, and iron colors. The colors that resemble the sun, golden, saffron, purple, and bright colors. And then he lumps in Venus, Mercury, and the moon together for any colors that are white, curious, green. I don't know what a curious color is. Yeah. So, fast forward, we get to Eliphas Levi, who was actually wrote something 45 years after Gerte wrote his book on color. He has a very similar description of the use of colors for planetary magic. So for Saturn, he says, the vestment must be black or brown, with characters embroidered in black or orange-colored silk. For Mars, the vestment should be scarlet. That would be Jupiter. It should be scarlet. For Mars, the vestment should be that of flame, rust, or blood. Please take a seat. Oh, that's okay. And etc. So that is how magicians used it, which finds its way into Masonry, or perhaps was inspired by Masonic uses. So I don't know if all of you are familiar with Masonry. They've especially higher degree Masonry, they've got an apron for each degree, and the apron is all these different colors that are related to, the degree where they might describe it. They're like, well, the crimson of the blood he shed for us, or the white of the tears that we shed because he shed his blood, and it kind of it keeps growing in that sort of chain. And then lots of different ribbons that they wear, and all sorts of occult colors. And on the screen here, I've got one from the ancient and primitive rite, where they have like an entire elaborate setup here of different banners, and each one's for one of the 12 tribes. And during the degree, they actually describe why they chose a particular color for that particular tribe, and they talk about all the different greens and pinks and whites, and you can find the script for that if you're interested on the site that I mentioned, keepsilence.org, Liber Iris. Then we've also got the SRIA, who is a sort of a mystical Freemasonic offshoot. As soon as Freemasonry opened itself up to esoteric orders, they immediately formed, and they use colors very esoterically, and we draw a lot from their particular use of colors. The Masonic ones we don't really draw heavily from. It's just more the concept is kind of interesting. But so this is actually from one of the SRA rituals. They have in their second degree, they have electron color, and the three principal officers are in red, yellow, and blue robes, and they describe at the end during this lecture. So red, yellow, and blue have been attributed to three divine qualities, namely red to God's omnipotence, yellow to his omniscience, and blue to his omnipresence, or in other words, to his power, wisdom, and universality. they go on to describe at least the 7 colors plus white and black. A lot of in some of the we find the same style of lecture in certain Masonic sources too, where plus or minus a couple colors depending on how they're feeling at the time. So the SRIA had it. From there, we move into the Golden Dawn, who took that concept and ran full on with it. They were like, no, 12 colors? No, we're gonna go. Let's see, what's 22 times? We're gonna go 88 plus maybe almost 100. So, anyways, after I'm not a member of the Golden Dawn, but as I've been told, the ideal initiatory setting, you almost see no colors while you're going through their initiations. You see black, white, and red. Like those are the 3 colors. And then with the 0 = 0 having a few officers with a little bit more color, but you might be blindfolded through the whole thing, or the lights are off. But anyway, so up until the 5 = 6 where you're sort of ritualistically killed and put in this tomb, and then you wake up and there's all this bright color. You're like, they literally put you in a room where everything in the room is a different color, and then they give you a paper sort of describing what all the different colors mean, and that's the main place that the Thoth Tarot gets its use of color as a language. And so just a brief description of how they use it. So I'm going to assume everybody here is vaguely familiar with Kabbalah and the Tree of Life. If you're not, that we might have to have another lecture, but there's the Tree of Life that has 10 spheres, 22 paths, plus 2 that are sort of hanging off on the side, and maybe another sphere that may or may not be there. But anyway, so there's a number of elements, and each one is assigned. All the paths are assigned a Hebrew letter, but they're also assigned either an element, a planet, or a zodiacal sign. And we're seeing these laid out right here. And so you've got the 3 elements in the middle, the 7 planets, and the 12 zodiacal letters. And so Crowley was initiated into the Golden Dawn, and this imprinted very heavily on him, in part because I believe they were making people basically memorize the color tables at the time. And he uses it very heavily in his ritual and in his drawings and paintings and that sort of thing. Let's see here. So he took it and sort of exposed it to the world as in 777. So you got to keep in mind, at Crowley's time, the Golden Dawn rituals were still secret. Nobody really knew what their curriculum was. And for him to, not only did he expose their rituals in the equinox, but he also published 777, which was exposing a lot of the mystical secrets that they teach you in the degrees. Like even the knowledge of the Hebrew alphabet as a mystical language was considered secret. Like they were like, no, the Hebrew? I've never heard of that. Like that's completely. Don't look over here. Like,
One of his biggest disagreements is he got in a lot of trouble trying to teach people Hebrew.
So he took it, published it in 777, and that's kind of how we know about it today. So the basis of the system, as I said, is the Tree of Life. This is the Tree of Life in 4 different ways. The Tree of Life in the 4 worlds. So the 4 worlds are interesting to go into, especially in their relation to color here. And they're kind of, the descriptions of them are kind of vague. They're based on certain things from the Zohar, of the 4 worlds. And then they're even more vague when they're applied to a system of color, and then nobody really ever wrote down why they, did it in a particular way, other than it kind of is nice and looks cool. Let's see. So we'll go through the 4 scales here. The 4 scales of color are attributed to the 4 worlds, and also thence to the 4 letters of the Tetragrammaton. Crowley says here, the king scale, which would be over here, represents the root of color. That is, a relation is asserted between the essential significance of color in the Azuluthic world and that of the path as well as possible. He says, the king scale represents in an essence of equal depth with the other columns of the Hebrew letters, the heavens of SRIA, and the general attributions of Tarot. So he's saying it's of equivalent import in your studies as which tarot cards go with which letters or which paths on the tree to memorize these colors. It is a primary expression of essential ideas. So the king scale represents the root of color. The queen scale represents the first positive appearance of color. As the king scale is transparent, the queen is reflected. In this scale, therefore, we read the appearance of the 32 paths as they are found in nature. So this is kind of difficult to unpack. Essentially what he's saying is that, essentially what happens is that the paths as they're expressed here, so ignoring the circles, the paths are direct relation to things that are found in nature. So why is this thing blue? Well, because it kind of represents the sky, or something like that. Why is that one red? It kind of represents blood and iron and that sort of thing. Whereas over here, the paths are merely like color scales. And this is kind of an interesting. They aren't necessarily tied to any particular idea found in nature. They're more that second order of color association that we talked about, the illusionary one, where we have to say, well, what color is Mercury? Well, it's yellow. Why? Okay, well, because we've got a color scale. And these particular color scales become a little bit more apparent when they're not directly on the tree. When we go back to this, these are the color scales that I'm talking about. So the 3 elements form a complete color. They're just the 3 primary colors. And then the planets and the zodiacal ones form rainbows. Or more specifically, the 7 planetary colors are the spectrum of light as it comes out of a prism. So you've got all the way from red to violet. There's no purple. There's no crimson, because those don't occur naturally without mixing 2 colors of light. Whereas the zodiacal ring, the outside ring, is more of a color scale as you would have to make like an art class, where it does have a crimson and a purple. So when we get back to here, we're seeing these colors as expressed in those color scales, whereas over here the paths are related to some particular idea and aren't necessarily meant to be looked at as a whole, and thus it kind of looks a little ugly when we see it like this. It's not. Now, it's interesting to remark that the spheres in these two are the exact opposite. So in the queen scale, the spheres actually form a color scale. So like up above with the 3 supernals, you've got white, gray, and black, and then below you've got the 7 colors of the planets. Whereas over here, just as an example, we've got white for the colorless luminescence of Kether, blue for the sky, the Maslow that represents the Hokmah, and then crimson for blood of Bina. Yeah, so, and then etc. You can look, a great place to look this up is the notes on these colors in 777. Crowley goes in depth and talks about why he thinks each color is assigned to each thing. It's on the website, or you can look it up in the Wiser edition is a good edition. So the colors in the Queen scale, like I said, are based on things in nature. We think that, or Crowley thinks, that the elements are based on the colors of the tattvas, that the planets are based on the colors of the metals of those particular planets. So, like, Luna here is sort of a silver color. Mars is a rusty color. I guess represents rust somehow. That bright red is rust. And then Saturn for lead, etc. And then he says the zodiacal colors are less obvious in their attribution. In fact, it will be best to take this part of the column for what it may be worth as an uninitiated tradition. I am myself unable to attach any serious and important meaning to the majority of the symbols. At most, one can say that the color of the scale represents the denigration of the key scale. So he moves on to the Emperor scale. He says the Emperor scale is derived from the two previous scales by simple admixture, as of the colors of a palette for the most part. It kind of works for some of the things. Basically, we just combine it, so like this and this combine to make that. It works for most of them. He doesn't actually have an explanation for anything on the Emperor scale other than that. The scale of the Empress, so this one that gets all crazy over here, is generally speaking either a degeneration from the scale of the Emperor or a complementary attribution. But in each case, there is an added brightness whose source must be discovered by meditation. Let's see here. This brightness is a phenomenon compatible to that described above in connection with the empresses being the thrones of the spirit, and Malkuth being the extreme departure from the perfection of the supernals, and so the link through which the redemption of the whole complex structure below the abyss may be accomplished. The colors of the Emperor scale are combinations of two or more colors. The best may be considered as derived from the three previous scales, and the flecks or rays as representative of the bridegroom, who is appointed to bring the Empress to perfection thus. So what we end up having is that the element over here, leaving aside the spheres, which are almost all flecked, the elemental ones are flecked. So we've got three elemental paths which are flecked. The planetary colors have these rays. It just says they're rayed with the color, which kind of, you've got this colors shooting out. And then the zodiacal ones don't have either of the two for the most part, I think. Let's see here. So, just to go over again what these the four worlds mean, Fuller describes it pretty well, and this might give us a little bit better explanation for it. He says the Absoluth or Absoluthic world is the archetypal world or world of emanations, the 10 Sephiroth of which represent the operative qualities of the divine will. So this one is the pure will of God, is Sir Lee saying. The second one, Bria or the Briatic world, the world of creation, the 10 Sephiroth of which represent the abode of pure spirits. Consequently, it contains no matter. So these are the angels that are directly surrounding the throne of God. Yetzirah, or the Yetziric world, the world of formation, the 10 Sephiroth of which represent the angels or intelligence of the stars and planets, so the angels in the material world. And lastly, Asiya, or the Asiatic world, the world of action, also called the world of the Cliffoff, that is the world of the shells or demons. In its 10 Sephiroth live the actual material substance of the universe. It is the abode of Samiel, the Prince of Darkness. And that's, I guess, where we live. So.
He's flecked.
Yeah, as we'll see, Crowley tends, or Harris tends to use it in a matter that is usually positive, but sometimes it acquires that qliphothic aspect. But usually it's more like, oh, this is hey final, and we've completed everything, and this is the final manifestation of a particular work, and therefore it's usually, when that color appears, it's usually a positive, but we'll get to these examples. So, moving on from the four worlds. Oh, these things down here at the sides, which I haven't mentioned. These are the extra paths. So, because there's only 22 paths, once we take out the zodiacal, we take out the planetary, we're left with only 3 paths left for the elemental. And so they sort of invented 2 extra paths that are overlaid on this one and this one for spirit and earth. And so this is the color of spirit, and this is the color of earth in the 4 worlds here. Of particular note, I really love the bow of spirit and hey final of spirit. This is just the 7 rainbow colors, and then over here we've got white on the inside, red, yellow, and blue, and black on the outside, which relates back to the 3 colors that we saw on the 3 officers of the SRIA. It's also the 5 colors of the officers of the Gnostic Mass. So, in a way, you could look at those 5 officers as being representative of spirit in its most earthly form, in the earthly scale. So, cover your eyes if you're in the AA. I don't want anybody to burst into flames here, but so Crowley. So not only did he use it symbolically in like the Thoth Tarot, but all over the place. Whenever you see Crowley using colors, it probably has some link back to this system. And so in this particular work, it's called Liber Pyramidos, which may or may not be a holy guardian angel working, or an initiation and self-initiation into the AA, one of those two, maybe both, depending on who you talk to. We see judicious symbolic use of color. In this particular case, there's a word associated with this degree that is supposed to be only for initiates. And so he doesn't write it in there. Instead, he puts it in color and says, here's the secret word, and repeats this particular pattern 3 different times over the course of this work. And if you are an initiate of the colors, you would know immediately what the secret word is by looking at this. Of course, due to the fact that we haven't had very good scans of this work, and the color correction happens in different ways, people have come up with a variety of interpretations of what these particular colors are. This is a particularly good scan, and I've brought out the vibrance a little bit more, like I've enhanced the saturation and the vibrance of the colors. So it is a little difficult, but right below it, we do see kind of a code down here that shows you a little bit of, so similar colors are interpreted similarly. So here he's using the colors to directly reference letters. So if you were to go and look up the letter of the path, you would have the secret word, just to make it even more simple to explain this. I'm not going to say it. That's homework if you guys really want. Down here we do, however, in the code, he's sort of saying, well, this yellow color here is Aleph, or Alpha. This greenish, this light green color is Iota. And so the Iota in particular gets a little misinterpreted just because you see it as green, and there's lots of different paths that are greenish, and what is that called? So anyways, yeah. So that's Crowley using it directly as a code. We also see it, like I said, in the Gnostic Mass. You had the 4 colors of the officers, but he uses it very specifically in his rituals. Whenever you see it, also in the Rites of Eleusis, there are very specific color names, and those are intended to not just be like, oh, like when he says in the Mass, the priest's robe should be scarlet. He's not meaning like reddish, some vague red color or whatever. He means specifically scarlet, because scarlet is flame, it's fire. And so he represents this flame that's purifying the universe, or however you want to look at that. But also then, the Mass altar should be crimson. So you've got this very specific use of color. And crimson, of course, is the color of Binah, as we pointed out earlier. And so you get this idea that the Mass altar is the embodiment of Binah. There's a whole other lecture on that. So we finally get to the Thoth Tarot. Which we can separate into different categories depending on the types of colors used in them. And this will be more obvious as we go through all of the examples. We'll go through them very slowly. But just to give an overview of what it's going to be, in particular, the trumps are generally based on the path colors. So the 4 colors of the particular path that are assigned to that card. Sometimes there's other combinations that come into play, and when those things come in, when we see those, they usually mean a very specific thing, and that's how he's using it as language. So we'll go over that. A good way that I've been examining this, and you can see this on Liber Iris if you go check that out. You look at the card and you can subtract all the colors of that particular path from the card, and whatever isn't explained by the path colors usually has some sort of meaning that you can think about or read the description and sort of think about. So that's the trumps. The court cards are generally the combination of the colors of 2 elements, or sometimes a single element. These are a little bit more loose. There's a few colors in there I haven't been able to figure out entirely. It may be that he's bringing in zodiacal attributions into play, because they represent the deacon or the decans, and the decans are like combinations of different zodiacal things. But that one I'm a little bit unsure of. But for the most part, you'll see that it is the colors encompass just the element, or possibly the element combined with the sub-element. With the small cards, it's divided into the 4 aces and the 36 decans. The aces, strangely enough, are the most complex combinations of the entire deck. Probably because they're the root of the elements, the root of the elemental force. And therefore, like, fire has to contain Mars and Aries and all these other things within it. That's my explanation. I don't know why. Harris didn't write why she did this, and Crowley certainly didn't. In parts he writes it, and we'll go over these examples. And then the funnest one probably is the 36 decans. These each of these small cards has a planet and a zodiacal sign attributed to it, and they're incorporated directly into the painting, so it's very obvious. But the cards themselves are just direct combinations of the 2 paths for the most part. I don't think I've found any that incorporate any other colors other than the 2 paths being merged together, and it'll be very obvious when we show it here. So let us move on to the trumps. First, we're going to cover the monochromatic ones, which are generally 1 path of colors worth, but also the colors themselves are kind of all in the same general vicinity of each other. So here we've got the Emperor. It's really simple. The Emperor is kind of a simple card. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's certainly when you do ritual. So another note on color is Gerte even recommended this when you're using color as a evocative element. He says it's best to be in a full room of the particular color to get its affects the most fully on the psyche. And when we do ritual here, we often will turn the lights different colors, and red especially leaches out all the color and turns everything monochromatic, so that this is very sort of evocative of that. Now I should also note that these colors are things that are the particular shades that I'm using are derived from just my own intuition on the colors. In part, I tried to base a lot of them on what's that? The big color company that puts out the swatches. Yeah, Pantone. So for the most part, I try, like, if I want to do Scarlet, I'm like, what does Pantone call Scarlet? You know, they name their colors, and so I tried to use those. Some of them, like Brilliant Flame, it's like, okay, what is that? But when what's kind of interesting, so for that one, it's part I looked at the tarot cards to sort of say, well, okay, what isn't Scarlet Red? And going red, it's okay. That color we're going to call Brilliant Flame, and I might be wrong. So who knows?
I've heard that when the Golden Dawn set up their like correspondences, that the names were based on paints from a particular paint company. So
yeah, they had a
plane was whatever came in a tube that said Brilliant from this particular.
They had like a catalog. Yeah, well, the cat. So I've even seen it where somebody cut out little pieces of the catalog and sort of they had to.
That too.
You can. There's pictures of it online where they're actually the Golden Dawn was members were given a homework to construct their own color circles and try to fill in the colors, and some of them they're like literally cutting out the samples and like pasting them on there. So that's him. Then we move on to Libra. This is one of my. I love this pale green. Some people hate it, but I love it. Yeah, again, there's really no colors. There's variations of darkness that come into some of these blues, and you'll see whites and blacks incorporated into the cards sometimes. This one doesn't really have any of those. It just has variations on brightness. These two cards in particular are fun because Crowley used, this is one of his other little schemes that he liked to use. In particular, we find that on the cover of the Equinox here, so this is was on the first 10 issues of the Equinox, Aries and Libra over here, and he's using the particular the king scale colors of these cards to represent these things. In particular, they're the two signs of the equinox. So that's there's some other meaning behind that. But he would also use it to reference himself and Leela Waddell. For some reason, I don't understand this. I don't know if he had some weird thing that he was doing this code, but in the Equinox, he printed in Volume 3. He printed himself in red, and he printed her in green. For whatever reason, he was like, you know. And then you find these other rituals, like there's one for like a Gnostic ordination ritual where the priest gets like tied to a cross and stuff like that. I've never heard of anybody using it, but the officers are in these particular colors, and I think there's one Rite of Eleusis where the violin player, the person who's supposed to be playing violin, was wearing green and he's wearing scarlet. So I don't know. He had a weird little obsession there.
They are the most flashing out of the complementary.
This is another one of my favorites. I love all the purples, and it has. Sometimes we get these weird colors that white tinged purple. You know, what is that exactly? It's just kind of a. Some of them aren't like just pure colors. They're like they describe sort of reflection color and different colors that physical materials can take that I can't represent on a screen necessarily. Let's see here. So then that's the last of the sort of monochromatic. Then we get to ones that are very high contrast with the colors, and so in the Magus here, the Magus is the king scale emerging, and then in the background we've got gray and this indigo color, kind of slightly rayed with violet down there. And so in these are kind of the more fun ones, because then we can start to tell a story with the colors, whereas the other ones where all the colors were kind of merged together, and it's like, but this one we can say, well, the Magus is the king scale, and we can sort of think, well, maybe that means something. In the Trump tarot, the trumps, it's a little bit less obvious, but when we get to the decans, we get to tell some really cool stories. Here we've got the Death card. One of the very hard colors to come up with is what exactly is livid indigo brown, which is, so you've got like a blue brownish color, and it's supposed to also look like the iridescence of a black beetle. So that's it's kind of close. But yeah, this one. Move on. We get to one of the raid colors. So we also, in addition to, so the first of the planets that the first of the raid colors that's incorporated directly into the card like this. This is direct rays coming out of this thing. That is also, it's a direct, you tend to get this, especially with Soul. He makes the ray, or she makes the rays in the red against an amber background. But we're also, this is in the three of the trumps. We also see the rainbow colors added to the card. I don't have a great explanation for that, other than they just kind of like the rainbow colors added to it. It's also the spirit color of the Emperor's spirit color. So maybe that can tell you something. We also see here an additional color of green, and he calls out that specifically as the color of Earth in the description. You can read more of why they specifically incorporated that. But. There's a note here. This is what Crowley says about it. The perfection of soul is the sun is its fixation in the amber of Cancer by elevation at the summer solstice. In this, it receives the adornment of pure physical energy, fire. The red is purer than the orange, being of the incorruptible element. So he's just describing why amber red is appropriate for the sun. Amber is the color of Cancer, and so he's sort of making that illusion. Here we also see the rainbow colors being added to the card. We also see some colors down here, which I'm not. This is one of the few ones I haven't come up with a good explanation for why we have this little green pine cone and purple grapes.
On the Fibonacci.
Well, sure, but like why he's using these specific colors that aren't part of, or why we're using these. Yeah, why we're using these specific 4 colors here. Maybe it's represents Earth in some manner. It's hard to say. But she's weaving this veil out of the colors of spirit, which is fun. Another famous use of the rainbow. So this is the third card that incorporates the rainbow into it very ostentatiously. In the Rider-Waite deck, this card has the rainbow incorporated to it as well, but in a very symbolic, like an opposite way of the way we're using color. They actually have a little iris flower over in the side, and iris is just Greek for rainbow. And so like it's like, oh, there's also an iris, a rainbow. Also, we have these 2 characters appearing, which are not of the color scale. I don't have a great explanation for if these are within our explanation of the use of colors, or if these are the odd actors that are completely out. But if anybody has any thoughts on that later, I'd love to hear them.
The only things I've heard about those 2 were related to the white and red texture.
Sure. Right. I mean, they're obviously the alchemical symbols, but as for whether or not these colors are also somehow tied to the the colors of the four worlds is something I'd be interested. Like, is this particular color of scarlet mean Aries, or something like that would be interesting to. If anybody had any thoughts. When we also see them here on the Lovers card. These two cards also deviate slightly from the color schemes, with the heads of these two beings being different than the color scale, but that just might just be because I wanted particular shades of skin in this case. But yeah, this one I love. We've got the mauve sort of guy here, and then the bright oranges and the yellows. This one is a particularly striking use of the colors.
Did you mention they're switched in the two colors?
Yes, they are switched, and that's Crowley writes extensively about that in the Thoth Tarot book. So some of the not as extensively as people would like, but more than I'm willing to go to in this lecture. So let's see here. So here we start to get into ones where we can definitely explain the odd colors out. So here we've got the Heirophant in red-orange with the child on him in the deep warm olive, moving on into the rich browns of the other colors, and the deep indigo in the back, which Crowley says represents the body of Nui for this color. But we've got this lady right here, who is slightly different colored. You could explain her away by saying it's maybe a weird color of indigo, but she's holding a moon and is in the colors of the moon, so of the priestess. So she's just, we've got this little region right here that's the domain of the priestess. Likewise, we see that use of the lunar color on the card that is on the opposite side of the tree. So most of these colors can be explained with Cancer. Well, some of them. So he's got an amber armor on. He's got the bright, rich russet over here, the maroon pillars. But then where did all this blue come from? I think the explanation is just that it's lunar. He's literally sitting on a silver moon right here, and so Cancer is in the house of the Luna is exalted in Cancer, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then I forget the other one, the Religion of Taurus. But yeah, there's a Religion of
And you might also, I think, there's a reoccurrence of the rainbow here if you look closely, because this is purple on the outside, and this kind of rainbow colors going there. And again, we find sort of these black and white figures at the bottom that aren't necessarily of the color scale reappearing. So here's another fun one, which one thing to note about indigo. this is sort of a fun rabbit hole to go down. What we call indigo, like if you search for indigo on the internet today, you would see a purple color, like a dark purple color. And it's not indigo. Like indigo is a physical, like thing. Like it's made out of these flowers, and it's a very specific color that is this kind of very rich, deep blue. And it's reinforced here. We can see the use of indigo here on the little wreath around the circle. The goat's pole here. I don't know. And then the blue-black out here. But then we're left wondering, well, what are all these other colors? Like, we've got, this pink in the back, and we've got these rich salmon spheres. Anybody would describe those as rich salmon spheres. That's immediately obvious. But they're the colors of Tiphereth, or Tiphereth. So clear pink rose in the back, and this is So the path of Aeon is the path that leads from Hod to Tibereth. So it's just sort of saying, kind of like, it's almost like projecting, like, you know, you're standing in Hod and you're looking up at Tibereth, and the goats kind of guarding the way. So it not only can it be other paths, but it can also be the certain spheres come into play. So this is a fun one too. We've got, for the most part, it should be the colors of Leo, the yellow greenish sort of mixed with the reddish amber down here. You've got the deep purple in the background, the gray up here. But then we've got this area right here that isn't explained. So we say, okay, and this is what I'm saying, you can sort of look at them and discount all the colors that should be there, and then you're left with, well, what is going on up there? And so in particular, I think what she's holding here, which you can interpret in a lot of different ways, is sort of a rich, bright russet color, indicating Cancer, which indicates the Holy Grail. And then up above, we've got very clearly bright blue rayed with yellow. There's no other way to describe that. And Crowley notes that particular color, so it's the Jupiter, the Empress color of Jupiter. He says it represents the religious devotion of Jupiter being rewarded by the yellow rays of the holy guardian angel. So it's religious devotion being fulfilled by the angel coming down and abiding in it. And so in a sense, you've got the consecrated Holy Grail here. It's the essence of religious devotion, the blood of the saints that's been poured into this cup of Cancer that she's that Babylon is holding aloft. Well, that's my interpretation. Crowley doesn't write anything about that in the Thoth Tarot. He's like, no, just, you know, he focuses mostly on her and these little guys in the background kissing feet. And we also find this particular bit of symbolism in the Knight of Cups. So the whole, except for the white horse, which is, you could explain away with one of the colors of water, but the whole is the color of water, except for that little corner up there, where we literally have a crab who's the color of Cancer, and likewise maroon, one of the other colors of Cancer. Whereas we saw the cup was in bright russet in the past page. So I got these two. This
is all watercolor?
Yeah, these are big paintings. Like, they're, as far as I understand it, they're like this big, and they're being stored in England in a museum on racks where nobody can see them. And the O.T.O actually did some work to preserve these not too long ago. I think Veer Chappelle had headed up a charge to raise a bunch of money, and the glue that they had used to adhere the canvas to the wood of these paintings was slightly acidic, and was starting to like eat through, and could have potentially discolored these things. So we raised a bunch of money and did some restoration work. So yay, O.T.O.
Did you say that, or did you confirm that they're being watercolor paints?
Should be watercolors. So we've got the Hermit here, another very high contrast card. The plum color. I was having a lot of trouble deciding what color what exact shade of plum to use. These are the trials of a magician. You got to pick out exactly the right color of plum, and then I'm like, I'll just use the color that he's wearing. It'll be fine. That'll work. So we've got the plum color. Now the three elements that stick out here are Cerberus down here, who is specifically in the colors of Capricorn. He's black and gray and even has like little indigo chokers on, maybe collars, I guess. They call them chokers. So, and Crowley says in his description that the Hermit is followed by Cerberus, who is the dog of hell. So, sort of representing those demonic, hellish, things. We've got his lantern here, which could be the color of Tippereth. That's what I'm going with. And then we've got this little guy, a little homunculi.
What is that?
So there's the concept of the homunculus. This is an outdated way of thinking about how sperm actually works, where each sperm contains a little man in it. Crowley knew better. I don't know why it's even on here. It's so bizarre. I would
understand it maybe being on the Emperor card, but on the Hermit card?
Well, it's the secret seed is the idea, and it's sort of the mystical homunculi in this sense. It's not meant to be taken literally. It's more the secret seed of the gnosis that is the Hermit carries with him. He's not telling anybody, so But in this sense, it's this.
Because I get the snake at the bottom. That makes sense to me, too.
So the odd bit is I can't really decide exactly what color that's supposed to be. It could be lavender, which would indicate Da'oth. So Da'oth, there's colors for Da'oth. They're not commonly used when you make trees of life, but it's lavender.
I never see a color for I've never seen it.
They're actually really nice, like lavender and. I'll show you later. But
Yeah. One of them's like a really rich violet color.
I meant the color white or violet was really hard to like.
Oh yeah.
I was trying to make a match.
Oh. So when we get to our first elemental card, so the Fool, for the most part, all the colors are explained. You've got the sky blues, and the bright pale yellow of his cloth that he's or of his cape, I guess maybe. He himself is emerald flecked with gold, which is often represented in the other cards as like gold armor that has green armor or a green cloth that has a gold sheen to it, as though it's green here, but then you're seeing the sort of the light reflecting a gold color. But this one has some odd elements. It has the tiger here and this guy, which could be that might be colors of this particular path. But I think what ends up happening is the elemental cards contain the other elemental colors in them, and this will become obvious in a different one here. Well, except for this guy. This guy's almost this guy only has watercolors. Similarly to the gold sheen, he is probably supposed to look like Mother of Pearl. So it's described as white flecked purple, but it says like Mother of Pearl. And if you've seen Mother of Pearl, it has like a lot of opalescence to it.
Yeah.
And so you can see this with these sort of like little opalescence lines right there. And I think that's what's going on. Each of their bodies is the actual color of the Empress scale. And again, we've got black making its way in here. Maybe that has some reference to Capricorn or some other black color, hard to say. Especially with the black valves that are going into his hands and his feet. The sort of, or maybe the color of Saturn, sort of fixing him there. So, and then the most complex elemental color, the Aeon card, which has all three elemental colors very big expressed very vividly here. So, whereas we would expect to see something like the Emperor card, just like all red or whatever, We actually see lots of reds, we see the blues for the water, yellow here for air, and then perhaps even the color of earth with his skin being green. And under the wings here we see some green, and even maybe white with the Hippocrates in sort of a transparent color. But Crowley does use this particular pattern of the path of Shin, or fire, being composed of the 3 different colors in other places. In particular, we see it here in another one from Liber Pyramidos. It says, "Thus is the great pyramid builded out of the different elements." And so he actually has this pyramid here drawn with those those reds and yellows and blues in there. And he reuses this particular type of drawing of the pyramid in the 231 sigil for the Path of Shin. So it's kind of, we've got that little symbol right here. As for what the meaning of that is, I will leave that up to you to decide. The pyramid is sort of built out of the 3 different elements in a way. We've also got another color code there that I don't entirely understand.
Yeah, it seems like it could be.
I have some theories, which we can cover.
I'm just trying to see how many colors are in it. I mean, I do see the 3 element colors. But he's got
There-
5 of them up on top. So
He uses the 3 colors. These 5 colors
I think that's
to color the pylons of this ritual, and so each pylon's placed in a particular corner of the temple. So there might be something there. This might be. Is this the last of the trumps that I'm covering? So Luna also has a lot of complex combinations going on. So not only do we have the colors of Pisces with like the crimson and the buff. Buff's a weird one nowadays, especially. It's sort of like, it's described as the color of sand in some places. The stone color up above. And so we're left with the sun here being, of course, the amber rayed red. And also a lot of colors of Luna, because we've got this blue here that's slightly unexplained, and Pisces being the moon and the sun kind of conjoined. We have those 2 paths coming into play here. Well, that's how I interpret it. You might say, why is that so black? I don't know. You tell me. So now we move on to the small cards, where we get lots of simple combinations that tell interesting stories, I think, because this is where the color stories really start to matter. The trump cards are more or less like the forms of them are fixed. Like you have to have the sun on the one, you have to have the hermit. And you can throw in these extra little symbols here and there, but the small cards are sort of up in the air. As long as you've got 6 cups on there, it's anything goes, really. Like you can, so this is where the forms start to get more geometrical, and the colors start to tell more and more of the story. So here we've got the 6 of Cups, pleasure, which has the colors of soul in the foreground. So the cups, the flower cups, are made out of orange and gold and stuff. And then in the background we've got the colors of Scorpio. So green, blue, and these dull brown kind of lines here. And Crowley writes a little bit about this, but he doesn't reference the colors. He writes about the story that he wanted Frieda Harris to tell with her rendition. So it's hard to say how much direction he gave her in terms of draw this or that, or if he just gave her rough ideas, but said, use those colors. You better be in the right colors, or I'm going to be, or it's not going to be okay. The magic will be off, maybe. But so he writes, this card shows the influence of the number 6, Tiphereth, in the suit of water. This influence is fortified by that of Sun, who represents the 6. So 6, is in the color of the sun. Cool. The whole image is that of the influence of Sun on water. His fierce but balanced power operates that type of putrefaction, this being the sign of Scorpio, which is the basis of all fertility, all life. So we get a sign, sort of a story here where this plant is growing out of putrefaction, like a perfect soil for the perfect plant in a way. And he goes on to say that this card actually contains the secret of the 9th degree of the O.T.O, or at least the sort of the hexagram, and I don't know. He doesn't say why, and I don't know why, but. Sorry, what's that?
Is that satiety? Which card is that?
Pleasure. It's not satiety. No. It's pleasure, and like I said, we've got the planetary sign there, and the monitors cutting it off here. The sign of Scorpio down there.
It's fire and water. It would be very simple.
Maybe sun is generally air in Crowley's mind, I think. But I mean, it's also fiery because he says it's fire, so it's like. But yeah, so we move on to another. So I'm not going to go through all the small cards. We went through most of the trumps, but I've just got a small selection of the small cards here to sort of show off some of my favorite ones. Here we've got the 9 of Cups, where the cups are Jupiter, and Pisces is delivering water to them in the colors of buff and crimson. But also in the background here, we've got a little bit of indigo, which could represent Yesod. So Crowley describes the small cards as not only as combinations of the planet and the sign is on this one. It's probably being cut off right here, but also of the element and the Sephiroth. So sometimes the Sephirotic colors and sometimes the elemental colors will come into play, and we'll see that a little bit more in some of the other ones. This was one of my favorite ones when I was first trying to come up with this theory, and I'm like, okay, let's try to apply it to this one. I'm like, what? No, it's totally true. So here. Like, this has always puzzled me. I'm like, why the hell? What is up with these colors? I tried to come up with a scheme. Nothing. There's nothing other than this. You've got 2 geometrical figures here. You've got this sort of rhombus guy and like a pyramid below him. And the top one is in the colors of Sagittarius, so yellow, green, blue, and dark blue. Oh no, this one's in Mercury, sorry. So the yellow, I think this is blue. Okay, this is blue. And then Mercury is the purple, the indigo, the yellow, and the gray. So we'll put that. And then you've got the grayish background. But included in those is not red, and there's a lot of red in this card. And so I'd say the red is probably representative of fire, which is just the elemental color. Crowley talks about it. He says, it will be noted that there are no flames in this card. They have all been taken up into the wands and turned into rays. On the other hand, the electric energy has created intelligible geometrical form. Moving on to the next ones. So this one is more or less what we would have expected the Shin card to look like, just lots of fiery energy. The 2 wands are, he says, this card pertaining to Hokmah in the suit of fire represents the will in its most exalted form. It is an ideal will, independent of any given object, for pure will unassuaged of purpose, delivered from the lust of result, is in every way perfect. So not only do we have these fiery colors, but then we've got like this soft blue color back here, which probably represents Hokmah. This is one where the Sephirotic colors are also bleeding over into the card as a background. These 2 wands are later shown in the 10 of Wands card, but they've lost their fiery glow, and now they have the colors of Saturn applied to them. They're dark indigo and blacks. Sagittarius is back here, and then the fiery colors in the back. He says, This shows the force detached from its spiritual sources. It has become a blind force, so that the most violent form of that particular energy, without any modifying influences. The flames in the background of the card have run wild. It is fire in its most destructive aspect. The card also refers to the influence of Saturn in Sagittarius, in the foreground of this. Here is the greatest antipathy. Sagittarius is spiritual, swift, light, elusive, and luminous, being these blue guys here. Saturn is material, slow, heavy, obstinate, and obscure. The 8 wands are still crossed, showing the enormous power of the completed energies of fire, but they have lost their patents of nobility. Their ends seem more like claws. They lack the authority and intelligence shown in the earlier cards, and in front are the 2 formidable dorjes of the 2 wands, but lengthened into bars. The whole picture suggests oppression and repression. It is a stupid and obstinate cruelty from which there is no escape. It is a will which has not understood anything beyond its dull purpose, its lust of result, and will devour itself in the conflagrations it has evoked. So we've got these 2 aspects of will shown in these different colors.
Was that actually instruction?
I think it's oppression. So here we've got the use of the raid color as sort of a cliphotic aspect. So sometimes we see it as a positive aspect. Here it's sort of, it represents the chaos outside of the order. This is, I think, Balance is the name of this card. It says, what's that?
Truce.
Oh, the truce.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's right.
Is it truth or truth?
Truce. They've come to a truce.
Where's the two swords?
Peace.
Peace.
So it says, the number 4, Hesed, is here manifested in the realm of the intellect. Hesed refers to Jupiter, who rules in Libra in this decadent. The sum of these symbols is therefore without opposition. Hence the card proclaims the idea of authority in the intellectual world. It is the establishment of dogma and law concerning it. It represents a refuge from the mental chaos, chosen in an arbitrary manner. It argues for convention. So, we've got the chaos represented by the cliphotic colors on the outside, and then the purples and the emerald green kind of in the inside. Although there is also the pale green, so I don't know if they're using that in a positive or negative light. Hard to say. Let's see here. So then, here is the opposite of that card. The rose has been destroyed in the middle and scattered into petals. And this is probably one of my favorite hued colors of the deck. Just the effect she gets with these colors here. But so instead of being a nice balance of colors, the colors have sort of separated. We've got the early spring green and the emerald green on the outside, or on the bottom here, the violet and the bluish mauve up above. And this one's especially fun because where they meet, they both got sky blue as the queen scale, and so we've got this sky blue right in the middle, which is kind of a, I don't know if they noticed that. I was like, oh, this will be a nice effect to show off our color skills. Let's see, did I have the description for this one? But this one in particular, the only thing that baffles me a little bit is what this indigo around this is supposed to be. It's not the color of the Sephiroth or anything else. So that would be one somebody could think on. And then the petals themselves are in the cerise color, rayed with green. We've got the 7 of discs. This one I included. I mean, the colors are fairly obvious. It's mostly Saturnian, and then you've got these little sort of outlines in the red-orange of the Taurus color here. These could even be considered to be rayed colors because it's black rayed with blue or blue rayed with black of the Saturnian colors. And he writes about it, but he has a puzzling description of this that I've not been able to reconcile, other than he wrote it before he saw this, maybe, or he wrote it in spite of it. So he says, the number 7, Netzach, has its customary enfeebling effect, and this is made worse by the influence of Saturn in Taurus. The atmosphere of the card is that of blight. On the background, which represents the vegetation and cultivation, everything is spoiled. The 4 colors of Netzach appear, but they are blotched with angry indigo and reddish orange. The discs themselves are the leaden discs of Saturn. The colors of Netzach do not appear here. I don't know what he's talking about. Like, these are, like, there's no green, which are like green color, you know. So I don't know what he meant by that, other than maybe like he's saying they're like behind the card, I don't, like, or they've been turned into this color. They used to be the colors of Netzach and are now sort of.
Could you reread that stuff?
The 4 colors of Netzach appear, but they are blotched with angry indigo and reddish orange. The discs themselves are the leaden discs of Saturn. And so, yeah, a lot of times in the planetary ones, you'll see the colors of the metals coming in and coming into play. Get out of that morass. And we've got, not the 10 of Wands, but we've got the 8 of Discs. And this is a bright, cheery one. There's not a whole lot of explanation that needs to go into it, other than that they really used all the colors here. Like, you can see the colors coming into play. In particular, it's fun to look at the fruits, or the flower and fruit of this tree, which is the 2 Empress scale. So the total manifestation of these is in the plum color, and then the amber rayed with red there, and the fruits themselves are legitimately rayed with the color. He says, the 7 of Discs is, in one sense, the fullest possible establishment of matter. 8 of Discs. No. Yes. The 8 of Discs, the lowest fallen and therefore the highest exalted. Oh, maybe I was pulling the wrong thing here. Anyways, he talks about the fruits. You're gonna miss that quote. The fruits are fun. Yeah, the only one that's a little odd down here is maybe this green mixed with, like, when I see this color, I think of cerise rayed with green, as in the color of Venus, but maybe it's just plum mixed with green, I guess. The most fertile earth. Okay, the last of the decans that I'm going to cover is the 10 of Discs here. And I just wanted to include this one because it's a very good example of a positive card, where we've got the 2 king scale colors composing everything in the foreground, so the yellow and the green, and then everything in the background is sort of purple and gray. And nothing ever really kind of devolves into the lower scales.
Can I ask a question about that?
Oh, sure.
Is that a friend of the Nokia character?
Yeah, so he explains this as these are all signs of Mercury, except for this one, which is so he says this is a hexagram, doesn't have anything to do with Mercury. Other than that, it is in the position of Yasad on the tree, so therefore it's Mercury. But so these other ones are all Mercury signs. These are obviously Mercury is Bet for Mercury. This is the Enochian letter B, which he's also associating with Bet, for therefore Mercury. I think that's. I don't know. Oh yeah. And then this is the wand of the Caduceus wand for the Hyrux. No, not the Hyrux. The Calyx. Calyx. Yeah. So it's the which is very much associated with Mercury, and see the Golden Dawn rituals for that one. Okay. So the last slide I've got. Oh no! Got to cover this. This one. Hold on. You're gonna be there for. This one might take a little bit because this is. So like I said, the aces are probably the more complex of the things, just because they encompass the root of the colors. And so we see lots of different regions of color here. So not only... Well, let me read Crowley's description, then I'll break it down a little bit. This accordingly represents the essential form of the Holy Grail. Upon the dark sea of Bina, the Great Mother, are lotuses, 2 in 1, which fill the cup with the life fluid. Above the cup, descending upon it, is the dove of the Holy Ghost, thus consecrating the element. At the base of the cup is the moon, for it is the virtue of this card to conceive and produce the second form of its nature. So, it's a little hard to see because we're a little zoomed out, but we've got the colors of Bina on the outside being crimson and the black and maybe even gray flecked with pink. And so that's here and here and here, all the corners. Inside we've got the colors of water. She's literally trying to draw mother of pearl here. The maybe colors of water down here with the blues and the green. Possibly, and then again, sort of we have the same colors as we see on the skin of the Hanged Man. So essentially probably trying to represent mother of pearl. The cup itself is in the 2 colors of water, with a crimson mark on it for Bina. Maybe Pisces comes into play here too. It's hard, I don't know. It's also kind of a watery sign, so why not? But that leaves us with this whole area right here to explain, and maybe down here. And so what's going on here, I think, is we're seeing the Empress scale of Hokmah. This is white flecked red, blue, and yellow, which that's how basically how we have to describe that. And then a gray color coming into it. And so we can infer from this that we've got the Holy Grail, and as he says, the dove, how does he describe it? The Holy Ghost is descending into the cup and consecrating it. And so we can think of this as the will of Hokmah, or the outpouring of the force from Hokmah into Bina. Here is essentially what we're looking at, the sea of Bina. So the union of Hokmah and Bina within the symbol of the Holy Grail is how I would describe this. This could be gray, it could be colors of the moon here too, if we want to look into it. But Crowley is a big fan of the white flecked red, blue, and yellow, which I think kind of looks like birthday confetti, like birthday sprinkles on a cake. It's very fun. I don't like. It's in my mind, it evokes this fun feeling that's far too frivolous for what Crowley actually uses it for. Like, no, this is the holy dove descending. I'm like, oh, fun, yay, birthday cake, sprinkles. Like, why not? But we do see it in other stuff. So this is Liber Pyramidos again, and we see Osiris here. I think, yeah, Sar. Whose body is literally white flecked with red, blue, and yellow. And likewise, there's also this image of the Asarun Nefer's eye, I guess, opening up, and which is also in those same colors. And the words repeat again.
I'm sitting here thinking to myself, this is why people who can't draw hire people who can.
Yeah, this is Crowley's attempt at an illuminated manuscript, which
I beg your pardon, he was a painter.
he was the most brilliant painter that was ever. No, this is why he hired Frieda Harris to do the yes.
There's our.
I think I've heard a story about Crowley getting criticized for one of his paintings, and he got very offended. Like, he didn't have a sense of humor at all about it for some reason, or maybe he just didn't like the guy. I don't know.
No, the joke is that I get all these ideas, and I have him illustrate them because he is an artist.
Oh, cool.
I my stuff looks like this. And I give it to him, and I'm like, make it look like that, you know? So that was just my comment, you know?
Cool. Well, that's all the cards I have to go through. What I recommend you do, if you want to explore them on your own, maybe have a little wine, start looking at them, get some get some interpretations flowing, is go to keepsilence.org. Libra Iris is on there, and as soon as there's like links to some of the things, you start drilling down, and you'll drill down to where you can see a group of cards, or if you click the card will appear big like this with the colors on the side. And you can even click the colors to change the background, so which kind of lets you see the color a little bit more. It kind of pops out a little bit more. And that's fun to play with. So. Yeah. Any comments or questions? Well, thanks everybody. Oh,
Do you have that scan of Libra Pyramidos on Keep Silence?
no. I don't know who owns the copyright for it, so I don't. Maybe someday it'll appear somewhere, but it kind of gets passed around. I don't know exactly why it's so secret. I mean, Pyramidos is like a public document. I don't know, maybe it's because of the word, and people are all weird about the word or whatever, but yeah. Cool. Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Internet.